Hi, everybody. Scott Costa, publisher of TED Magazine. Thanks for joining us in this breaking news distributed with TED Magazine podcast, both on video and on your podcast players on your phones. We're talking about the election today, and obviously we don't have any results that you don't already know, and there's certainly a lot of speculation out there about who's going to win the race for president and what the makeup of Congress is going to be, and that's why Ed Orlet, who's the Senior Vice President of Government Affairs and Strategic Projects for NAED, is joining me on this podcast to talk about what we know so far, but also NAED's planned 2020 Electrical Industry Post-Election Conference that's going to happen next Tuesday, November the 10th, and what you can expect and why you probably need to join us for it. So I want to make sure that we're doing something here so you get kind of the latest on the lay of the land, what's happening, but also know a little bit more about the event that's happening next week. So enjoy this, my conversation with Ed Orlet. Ed, thanks for joining me on the Distributed with TED Magazine podcast. I know you've had a busy 36 hours. Are you awake? Are you okay? I know you're trying to communicate with everybody. Are you holding up?
Yeah. I mean, it's insane. I've been following elections most of my life, and it seems like there's this trend in things getting weirder and weirder as time goes on, and this one certainly has set the new standard in the weirdness for me.
No kidding. Again, so folks are listening, we're recording this on Thursday morning, so things could change depending on when you're watching or listening on the video or on your podcast players. So we appreciate it, but let's dive right in here. I'll start kind of easy with the House, although nothing was really easy with this election. No real surprises. Democrats remain in control, although not as much control as we kind of thought on Monday. What surprised you about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I thought I expected the House Democrats to expand their margin in the House, and they did not. Their margin actually went down. It was a part of a trend in every level of federal election, presidential, House, and Senate. The polls were really wrong again, and it's sort of that Lucy holding the football for Charlie Brown thing, and I'm Charlie Brown, and I keep running up, and they keep pulling that football away. It's just weird because you don't want to make evaluations and judgments in absence of data. I remember when I used to work on political campaigns, and one of the campaign managers I worked for would always say to people that came in and talked about the yard signs, and the campaign manager would say, "Yard signs don't vote." And so I've always taken that to heart. And so when I hear people, because everybody says, I see a lot of yard signs for Trump. And I would, yard signs don't vote. Look at the polls. Well, the polls were wrong again. They were even more wrong this time. And obviously not every poll was wrong. But I looked at a couple of things, specifically in the Senate, where Susan Collins never led in a poll, was never in the polling averages, none of the polls showed her in the lead. She won by 7 points.
Yeah.
And Lindsey Graham in South Carolina, they spent $100 million trying to beat him, and because they thought he was gettable, and everybody was saying that was a dead heat. I said, oh, that's a dead heat. Graham won by 10 points.
Yeah.
Points. So, we've, as a polity, have got to figure out polling. The whole landline thing just cannot be understated. And it just astonishes me that the tech companies can seem to know what we ate for breakfast, but we can't find a way of leveraging technology to have better polling. But
True.
Yeah, the House was a surprise, but certainly Nancy Pelosi's still going to have the gavel.
Yeah. And then the Senate, kind of the same thing. I think, the polling, showed that Democrats were going to win some, enough seats to gain control of the Senate. That is, there's still some votes out there, but that's not going to happen, is it?
No. And again, there was this talk of this blue wave that was coming, and Joni Ernst in Iowa was written off months ago, and she won another $200 million race. Yeah. These elections in the Senate there were 4 races where in excess of $200 million was spent on each. The North Carolina race was approaching $300 million in spending. And, you know, and Tom Tillis, another dead man walking who looks like he's going to win that thing.
Yep.
It was a very good day for Republicans overall. So, yeah, it looks like the Senate Republicans are going to end up with 52 seats. And Mitch McConnell and another guy, I mean, there were outside interest groups in these elections just lighting hundreds of millions of dollars on fire. They spent $100 million to beat Mitch McConnell. I think he won by 20.
Right.
You don't kill Cocaine Mitch. You can't kill him. And you know, the guy is just a genius, political genius. So yeah, the Republicans had a very good night. Martha McSally in Arizona lost, as we kind of thought she would. That was one where the polls were right. But the rest of these, just really massive misses by a lot of these folks. So, you know, the Senate stays the same. The House stays the same. It's sort of we did all this to be right back where we were in Congress.
And not only did we do all this, I mean, you touched on the dollars. I mean, billions of dollars spent. I mean, it's a shocking number, I have to assume, about what.
Yeah, and I don't have it off the top of my head, but the one thing that I used to tell people when we talk about money in politics, and I think this still holds true, is we still spend more on chicken wings at Super Bowl than we do on our political elections.
So there.
I mean, one could argue that as a free representative republic, it's okay to spend the money on it. I just think it's funny when people just waste tons and tons of money on races where it's sort of hubris. And, you know, the other thing to think about is, with money in politics, is there's this long held belief that Republicans have all the money in politics. And by what I've seen online, it looks like Democrats outspent Republicans $5.5 billion to $3.8 billion on legislative races. So it is a lot of money being spent, but it may not be spent in the way that you think it's being spent. So the Congress is kind of going to be where it was, more or less. The real wild card out there is the presidential election, which we still don't know. It certainly feels like things are trending in former Vice President Biden's direction, and Trump's path to re-election continues to narrow.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna. It's Thursday morning, depending on when you're listening to this, and I'm not going to hold you to. Obviously, nobody knows what's going to happen. You have to count votes before you can say what, and that's not really fair. But I think it's important to maybe bring up what happens after all the votes are counted, because this isn't over, and we're looking at recounts, we're looking at lawsuits. Where are we going from here? You know, after all the votes are counted.
Yeah, and you know, the one of the great things about the federalist system is that we have 50 plus 1 ways of conducting elections in the United States. The one being the District of Columbia, but the 50 states all have their own way of doing this, but there's some consistency in the rules. Typically, a state legislature passes laws to run the election, and typically a Secretary of State administers the elections. But the elections are conducted at the county and local levels, and all those numbers have to roll up, and it takes time. And you know, I think coronavirus, the pandemic, made this much more difficult in terms of getting those numbers in and getting them aggregated and collected and counted. But typically, the state elections state election officials will have between 1 and 3 weeks to collect all the votes, do what they call a canvass, where they review all the votes, and then certify an election. And so that's really what has to happen now. once the totals are certified, some states will have triggers for conducting recounts, automatic recounts, sort of a survey recount versus a full recount. Then you remember Florida, we had the hand recount and the guys holding up the ballots. And
hanging chads.
Exactly. It gets a little silly, and it astonishes me that when the adult penetration of smartphone usage in the United States is approaching 85%, and you have blockchain technology and two-factor authentication and biometric ID, how you couldn't just allow people to vote by phone, and the people that don't have the phones go somewhere and do it.
Yeah.
And the other thing is these states where you collect all these mail-in ballots, but then for some reason the state election authority isn't allowed to start counting them until after the polls close or until election day itself. Again, it doesn't make a lot of sense. There's I think in a lot of cases people are going to be talking, and I'm already starting to hear the talk about voter fraud. And I always stay away from that, because not that I don't think that voter fraud may exist. It's just, so how do you know? I mean, there was this idea that the Russians were beaming things into our brains to affect the election, but voter fraud doesn't exist. I can't square that circle. I know that there are probably bad actors in places who want to try to throw the election results. I don't know that there's anything systematic enough to sway 80,000 votes in a state, much less a national election. It's just, and then if there is, how do you prove it? So I'm concerned that a lot of that discussion over the next month or whatever it is will only serve to delegitimize our electoral process, right? Without it saying anything about either candidate or their supporters. It's just, the legitimacy of the government comes from the people in this country. And, if we don't believe it's on a square and on the up and up, that could be really problematic.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't want to rant along with your rant. I mean, I appreciate that democracy was at work, and I appreciate that, almost 200 million people had the opportunity to vote yesterday or Tuesday, and a great number of people did, but we haven't figured out how to count them. And it's like, geez, I really like the democracy to kind of fit into that. Okay, everybody gets a vote here, who's eligible. So I appreciate what you said about it. That's great. But now we got to talk about Tuesday, November 10th, because we still have to kind of try and figure this out. A smart move by you and by NAED was, let's have a electrical industry 2020 post-election conference, but let's not do it the day after because we don't know anything yet. So we waited a week. Good move, really smart. And even a week from now, we should have at least a better idea what's happening. Cross your fingers.
Maybe we should have made it a month after the election.
Yeah, right. Maybe it might be a month. We might have to do a second one. I know. But I think it's important, though, what you're doing in the conference. First of all, you have a ton of work you're doing, to set it up, obviously. But you're getting together with Nika, with Marco Giobardino, and with NAW and Jade West, and doing a great segment, which really, again, brings together distributors and contractors, and you're going to do a roundtable. But it's important to note that you're going to take questions from folks too, who just, again, everybody's got questions. Everybody's looking for some answers. So get into kind of what the setup of that is, and how folks can participate, and what you guys are mostly going to be focusing on.
Sure. So yeah, so Marco and Jade are pros. They really know this stuff, and they're out there in DC every day, and so they're going to have a lot of insight into why things went the way they did. I think when you consider that the president of the United States was under a cloud of suspicion of being a Russian agent for 4 years, that he was impeached, that he was called the biggest racist to ever, inhabit the office, and he was, pretty much on a daily basis, the mainstream media trying to let's just say slow his progress. Yeah. He still got within, it looks like he's still getting within a couple points and may win the thing when everything's said and done. It was not an electoral blowout, but there's just a lot of things to digest. What do people learn? What do we take away from that? I think we'll know for sure what's going on with the Senate by then. So we'll talk about where we are now, but we're going to really spend our time looking forward, because there's going to be divided government regardless, no matter who the president is. And I've always said that's usually a pretty good thing for business people. They kind of keep tabs on each other, and it can't go too far in either direction. So we're going to look forward more than we look back,
Right.
And spend some time talking about, the regulatory environment, what it means to our members, and what it means for the economic, getting out of this coronavirus induced slump and growing going forward.
Yeah. So attendees of the conference, if they have questions about whatever, what happens with legislation in terms of affordable care? What happens in terms of legislation in terms of, is there going to be an infrastructure package? What's going to, it's great that, they can ask these questions. And again, across the supply chain with distributors and contractors, you guys will be able to answer this stuff and help.
Absolutely. We will have plenty of time for Q&A. And as always, if you know how to get a hold of me in advance and you want to put a bug in my ear about something you want to hear talking about, let us know. But yeah, there will be a Q&A feature on the web interface where we can take your questions, and we'll leave plenty of time to
well, real quick, let folks know that how they can get in touch with you before the conference next Tuesday. An email, a phone, what should they do?
Yeah, and you can always get me at Orlet, EORLET at NAED.org. Hit me up there. I'm on LinkedIn if you want to get me on, DM me there. And since we're all working remotely, let's just stick to email.
Perfect. Hey, listen, I know you're super busy, and I appreciate you taking 20 minutes or so out of the day. And I know you got to go back to looking at numbers and crunching things and answering questions or whatever. But I appreciate you coming on the podcast. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Scott.
All right, we'll talk soon.
See ya.
All right, again, a big thanks to Ed, because he's a busy guy. And in addition to everything he's doing here for us with NAED, he's also obviously watching election results and trying to pass along information to all of us and all of you and everything he's doing. So to take a few minutes out of his day to talk to us is greatly appreciated. Just a reminder also, if you need to get in touch with me, 2 ways that you can do that. You can send me an email, scosta, SCOSTA at NAED.org. You can give me a call. I'm in my office. My phone's right there. 314-812-5311. If there's anything you want to talk about related to the podcast, TED Magazine, tedmag.com, Lighted, our e-newsletters, any of the things we're doing, please get in touch with me. I'd love to hear from you. And until we get a chance to talk again, thanks everybody for listening and for watching the Distributed with TED Magazine podcast.